Welcome to Frankly Speaking, the podcast on responsible business from Frank Bold, the public interest law firm. I'm Richard Howitt, and after leading responsible business issues in the European Parliament for many years, I host our discussion of the latest developments on corporate sustainability and responsibility, sustainable finance, business and human rights. Today, responsible business in Japan, the world's fourth largest economy. What progress are companies making there, and what lessons can be learned for the rest of us? Our guide is Akiko Sato, attorney at law at Kotonoha Law, Business and Human Rights Project Officer at the United Nations Development Programme, and Special Advisor at the Business and Human Rights NGO Pillar Two. Akiko, a very warm welcome to Frankly Speaking.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's my great pleasure.
Now, you're joining us from Tokyo, and before we get into the issues of Japan, as I often ask my guests, what is it in your personal life or career that got you into sustainability, business and human rights? Where did you encounter it? Why did you get involved in the very first place?
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, that is my favorite question that I frequently receive, and I try to make it simple or like a little bit short because it's going to be a bit long if you know that I will speak from the start to the end. But initially, when I was in elementary school, I became interested in the international development, the basic idea. So then that I was looking for the UN, and that it looks so cool. And then after that, in high school, I was then interested in law, as you know, the law looks like the very useful way to learn how the society structures. So then I decided to study in law department in my undergraduate. And also, since I was interested in international sphere, so I was also the major in international law. And then the law school system there just began there in Japan too. So then I chose to move to the law school. Then there studied for bar exam. But then after the passing there, after the taking the bar exam, but there are a certain months that when that we are waiting for the results from bar exam. And at that time, I did my intern at Ministry of Justice in Japan, and I met some the officers from the East Timor, the Ministry of Justice. Then that I realized that although I was keen to the work for international development, I never experienced the usual life of people in that the circumstance. So then even though I passed the bar exam, I decided to extend my a training for becoming a lawyer for 1 year, and I moved to Cambodia, Southeast Asia. Then I was living there for 8 months, and that was actually the basis of my passion and also interest for the business and human rights. And after that, I moved back to Japan. Then became a lawyer. Then the first career as a lawyer, I was a very general lawyer, so meaning that I did the very basic civil and the criminal cases. But at the same time, I was working for the NGOs based in Tokyo. Then I also went to Cambodia for some fact-finding research for the people who are forcibly relocated because of their development project, or the interviewed with the workers who they turned out to be one of the supplier of Japanese apparel brand. And also the who were experiences the severe working condition. So these experiences, the kind of the combined, then also their that made me as it is. Then I also did my master in the Netherlands, the major in development studies and also human rights. And after that, moved to Bangkok. Then I did my intern for UNDP. Then again, moved to Tokyo again. Then I was there mostly all the working on business and human rights since then. That was 2018. So then other the opportunities working for Business Human Rights Resource Center. And then since 2022, I again relocated to Bangkok, then partially worked for UNDP and also for some other Japanese the companies and also advocacies as NGOs. So that's how I came to here.
I don't know how you got through that so quickly, actually, but it's an impressive CV. But what I pick out from that is that you've been in Thailand and in Cambodia, and you've seen the impact of companies from Japan and elsewhere, and made those connections, which and that you chose to do that. You didn't just follow your law career, you took some time out to do it. So congratulations for that. And now you then got increasingly involved in international organizations, but for a number of years you were undertaking due diligence work with companies in Japan just as a lawyer, not connected with anything else other than your field of law. And I just wonder from those years what you learned about companies practicing due diligence and the commitment of Japanese companies to do so.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as I said, the when I started like a more like professionally, working on business human rights as a lawyer, that was the 2018. So the perhaps their the audience there remember that, but the 2018 it was of course already the UNGPs that there, but like in terms of the awareness and also the willingness among Japanese companies on business human rights, it was quite low, extremely low that I could say. So whenever I had the chance to talk with Japanese companies about business human rights, most of the responses are like, "What are human rights? Well, why the way as a companies that do anything there for human rights? That should be for the government, and also that we are of course complying with Japanese and also relevant law. So what else that we can do?" So that is like a first reaction that I received. But of course, after that, the legislation overseas that have also impacted on Japanese companies, and also of course, a national action plan on business human rights that published by Japanese government that in 2020, there has also made an impact on Japanese companies. So gradually, the companies are aware of its importance of their doing, they're more proactively on human rights. Of course, it depends on which industry that we are talking about, like apparel industry, garment industry, of course, because of Rana Plaza and also other, their unfortunate incidents, that many Japanese apparel brands were also aware of this importance, and also other ICT industry. Their business partners are, the companies that from the Europe or like a US. So they were also receiving the lots of requests on business human rights. So it's kind of like the patchwork. But then the things that compared to 2018, I could say that many Japanese companies are moving forward. Of course, there are a lot of the things to be done, but that's like a general impression that I recently, that I have now.
Yeah, and it does show it's a small world, and but both foreign legislation, but also what you said there about foreign events, things that are happening in the value chain that companies become aware of, was a big influence in all of that. Having said that, in every country and region of the world in which I've worked, local culture and cultural values and attitude plays a really big part of how business responsibility is viewed. What is the role of business in society is viewed differently depending on culture. And I know that's true in Japan as well. Tell me a little bit about what Japanese people and Japanese society believe the responsibility of a company to be.
Yeah, thank you so much for the very good and also very difficult question. So at first, I could say that many Japanese companies are a little bit conservative and also they're very keen to follow what their peers that do, rather than what internal standards that say. So it means that for instance, when I talk about business human rights or the UNGPs or the now the CSDDD, the more like the people ask me like what other Japanese companies are doing. So it is also the mindset that even though there is an international standards, but what is more important to them sometimes is what the other Japanese companies are doing. Maybe there it's the link to its geographical circumstance. They're obviously the Japanese island, and that is somehow I feel like impacted their awareness and also the a perception of human rights. Of course, the Japanese companies that take the social responsibility seriously, but it's they're not completely aligned with international human rights until recently, and also some companies are still struggling with finding the way comply with international standards with their the mindset. And also, although the many Japanese companies have become the so-called multinational enterprises, as many of you know, by the repeating the M&A, but I feel like the corporate culture that looks like still very traditional, the Japanese way, and which makes the corporate governance and also responsible business practice sometimes a bit ineffective, and also that there can also lead to the difficulty on their proactively working on human rights.
And you call them conservative, traditional, we can use different words, but I certainly know from my experience with Japan that there is still there are still barriers to women getting to the top of corporations, both in executive jobs and at the board level. And many friends of Japan, and I would consider myself one, and not saying that to be critical, but to want to work to try and change that. How far is that still a barrier, and how are companies themselves addressing that?
Yeah, thank you. That is also one of the serious human rights risks in Japan. So, as you may already know, Japan was ranked 148 by the gender gap their index this year. And it was the lowest among the G7, and also compared to their other Asian countries, it is quite low. So it can be maybe similar to the neighboring countries like South Korea, but Japan, there has been the very patriarchy society. So as you said, during their economic growth, in like the 1970s or 1980s, the males are predominantly, the responsible for the working or for the earning the living the wages. The fostering the family. So then the females were regarded as the more the care the giver at home, or for parents. So that kind of structure that has been really difficult to be unpacked, or they're distracted for the transforming their entire the concept they're embedded it in society. So this has been, of course, the paid a lot of attention, and many females, not only females, but of course it affects the males as well. So we are as Japanese society discussing how we can motivate, or how we can transform the society into more inclusive way, not only for females but also for other minority as well. But still, as I said, historically, it's really deeply embedded in our society. So I feel like we need more the radical change actually to be they're moving more ahead.
And Japanese friends have explained to me the concept of sanpo yoshi. Sanpo yoshi. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Just tell us where this comes into all of that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Oh, it's very good to know that you've heard this word. So the sample yoshi. So it means that the good for the street election, and that was from the business fund in the Omi, the prefecture. So this, I think this is maybe this developed in maybe a Edo era or sometimes. So as I said, the sample means a three direction. So what three includes is that the good for sellers, and also good for the buyers, and good for society. So to make the business satisfying for these three is a concept of sample yoshi. So yeah, many Japanese companies refer to this concept that they're saying that this is their kind of a basis of their business practice, and this can be also linked to responsible business, which I partially agree. But as I said, this is also from the Japanese traditional culture. So it means that this may overlook some international standards, like the females, like gender the rights, or other the equality or the non-discrimination. So personally, in my view, that we can also the perceive this kind of the existing concept to to tell them that tell people that the responsible business is not something new, and we Japanese, or in Japan, that we have this kind of concept for long, but at the same time that we also need to convince them that that kind of concept that needs to be also updated, that to fit into the current situation.
Yeah, but from the Edo dynasty, a concept that says what's good for society is good for business is a very, very strong starting point, isn't it? And perhaps again, that is something that the rest of the world can learn about. Now, you've already said how in the last 5 to 10 years, the Japanese or Japan has produced a national action plan for implementing the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the NGPs. And also, we've not discussed it so far, but Japan brought in guidance, METI, the business ministry, brought in guidance on due diligence by companies for human rights. So tell us a bit about what's perhaps special or unique in the Japanese approach in doing that, why Japan has done that, and how effective has it been?
Thank you so much. I also noticed that particularly concerning the legal development in other part of the world, Japan's approach there looks quite unique. And we can talk about the pro and con of that later. But first, let me explain how the like development on the human rights related policy in Japan has been. So the first, as I said, the NAFTA was developed in the 2020, but before that, in 2000, I think the 19, the Japan showed its commitment to development the National Action Plan in the annual forum in Geneva, as many of you there have attended before. And then for the next 2 years, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which there has been the a kind of like secretariat with other the ministries for developing it and also monitoring that. They had their number of the discussion on this some relevant topics or like some specific the rights holders topic, and then that that led to their draft of NAP, and then after public consultation, the finalized NAP that was released in 2020, and after that, I remember the next year, so meaning the 2021, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and also Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, or METI, co-organized a questionnaire among Japanese companies to see to what extent Japanese have conducted human rights due diligence, and also what kind of the policy measure required by Japanese companies. And the outcome there said that the many Japanese companies at that time it found like a UNGPs itself difficult to understand because it's too vague, and also of course we have the translation in Japanese, but like original their word is English. So again, this is also kind of like a gap between Japanese companies' practice and international standard. So then the many Japanese companies required the government to publish some guidelines that they can follow. So this is also quite kind of like a traditional way of Japanese. So they always look for any kind of guidance or instruction from the government, and the given having that the result the next the METI has been the more like a crucial role to come up with the guidelines. Of course, the ministries, including the MOFA and also the Minister of the Environment, for instance, are also involved in, and also Minister of Justice that were involved in the process. And also there are some stakeholders that are, including myself, that came together to discuss what should be included in the guidelines. And of course, the UNGPs, that should be the basis. So how we can make the guidelines the more useful and also more effective for Japanese companies. So then the outcome there is the guideline, and which was published in 2022. So then the content itself was not so much like different from UNGPs, of course. So there should be applied. It is supposed to be applied to the type of business, regardless of the size or the industries, and also require the companies to comply with the international human rights standards, including UNGPs, the OECD guidelines, ILO declaration, etc. But also at the same time, as I said, the many Japanese companies are still think that the UNGPs were quite the vague and they're not the concrete. So to reflect the feedbacks, the guidelines that include some concrete examples based on Japanese practices. Of course, this can be found in other jurisdictions, but just to make sure that Japanese companies that find that more relevant and also familiar with their daily practice. So then there as a result, the guidelines were, I think they're so far the well received by Japanese companies, and also there has been the reaching out to not only the Japanese companies, but also the medium the size of companies. I could say like a medium because I'm not sure about like a small the size the company. So not all SME, but what I want to say is that the guidelines were the reaching out to those that who haven't the looked the UNGP before, but also that the companies are also the expanding the business beyond Japan. So they also need to be aware that how the international standards require, and also how that they can they can the practice that the human rights due diligence. So that is the way, and also the some like a background of the guidelines in Japan.
And I believe those guidelines are translated into English and possibly some other languages. So for any of our audience who want to look at those concrete examples of Japanese companies, you're able to do so. And certainly those Japanese guidelines are very much part of the global sweep of towards mandatory due diligence. They're voluntary guidelines, but they come from a government ministry. So you wanted to add something, Akiko?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, I want to share that after the publishing the guidelines, the METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, also published the practical the guidance that for the companies, for not only Japanese companies, but I think that are the mainly in Japanese, if I do, if I correctly remember. But the practical guideline also include the like a format for identifying and also assessing the human rights risk. So by doing the format, the companies can start the human rights due diligence by themselves. So with that, I feel like it's more kind of like relatively easy for me to tell the companies that we have this kind of this information publicly available, and also coming from the ministry, so you can use it, and also this is also aligned with the international standards. So I think that kind of effort has been quite significant in Japan.
Now, you're a business and human rights expert, but can I ask you one question on climate and Japan's role on climate action? I think some people internationally would say Japan is a bit lagging. It's still increasing coal production. It's got this quite controversial idea of combining ammonia with coal-fired power stations, which some people are criticizing, will have bad environmental effects. What, from a Japanese perspective, when you're working and talking with companies, how do they view climate and climate action, and what Japan's proper role is in relation to that?
Yeah, thank you so much for again the difficult but very timely question. So the first, perhaps that you also already know, but number of Japanese companies which are signatories of TCFD is, I think, the highest in Japan. I think that I recently saw that there was more around or more than the 30%, the Japanese companies that complies of their numbers, the signatories of TCFD. But unfortunately, this doesn't necessarily link to the climate action, as you said, from human rights perspective, in my view. And also the will be linked to the government, the attitudes, or the government, the policies on climate change. So as you said, until quite recently, the Japanese government promoted the coal power plant, but now because of the pressure from the international society, then also the more the shift towards the more sustainable and also environmental the free the policy, then now the more and more the Japanese companies are they're trying to achieve the net zero, but still, as I said, I think that maybe that this can be also the common in the companies, but when I talked with Japanese companies, mostly the division in the company on human rights and climate change or the environment is separate. So it means that, that they, of course, that perhaps that they have some chance to talk each other under the Committee on Sustainability or any, the time occasionally. But the policy or like the strategy in the companies that towards sustainability in a broader way is not coherent in my view, or like it's not sufficient enough. So I try to convince companies that if you as a company that do the environmental risk assessment, that can also include the human rights perspective. And actually that is also written in Japanese environmental law, because it aims to protect the people's lives as a nature. So this is actually the basis of human rights. But still, the people think that of course, the environment and climate change, this can be also the different topic or the needs a different angle. But the more like environmental climate change are regarded, considered as something the more technical or the more scientific, and the human rights are more like how do you say, it's more like a narrative. So the company is a bit struggling with the finding the way to the merge or like to integrate the climate change, environment, and human rights together into more the efficient way.
And that's a challenge for companies everywhere, in my view, not just in Japan. But that fact on the Taskforce for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, many people in the world won't know that Japan is the leader in that. Again, you're not a reporting specialist, but on this podcast, we talk a lot about sustainability and business human rights reporting. And of course, there's the Sustainability Standards Board of Japan have announced moves towards mandatory reporting of the International Sustainability Standards Board ISSB standards with assurance from 2027 pretty quickly. Just give me a sort of overview of why Japan's enthusiastic about that and how companies are responding.
Thank you. So again, the disclosure is the one of the important elements of human rights due diligence, and also the communication or engagement with external stakeholders, including investors. So what I understood is that because of the development on disclosure in mostly Europe or like the other jurisdiction, so Japanese companies were also they requested the more about the disclosure from the mostly like investors. So then, as you said, SSBJ, Sustainability Standards Board of Japan, has discussed the standard, particularly for Japanese companies, but also they're aligned with ISSB standards. So then the standards was just released the March this year. And this complies with, in my understanding, the mostly like to the basic disclosure standards. And the first one is general disclosure standards, including the governance strategy of the risk management and also the target or the indicators. And the second one is the climate-related disclosure standards, which will be replaced with TCFD, in my understanding. And as you said, same as the other, the similar regulations, that the disclosure, the standard will be applied to the companies gradually. So the first, the mandatory, the category of the companies, for the mandatory that need to disclose, will be the companies with the market capitalization of the 1 trillion yen and or the more. And that will start from the fiscal year ending in March 2027. So I think that I haven't talked much with Japanese companies on this specific the SSBJ the standards, but what I heard from companies is that the first they are very frustrated and also getting tired of their responding to this disclosure standard, but also at the same time by the working on or by practicing for the disclosure, they can also of course get the useful information for their practice for future on sustainability, and also it can lead to the effective the combination, the effective integrations within the company. So, and it's also that sometimes it's sometimes what I heard is that the people in the company who needs to deal with both human rights due diligence and disclosure is quite small. So it means that just a few people that needs to, that address these two, the complex, the thing. Of course, that they are interlinked, but that's there also. I'm afraid that perhaps that they may, rush to more the ticking box exercise, and they do not they look at more substantial impact. So I hope that the discussion will urge the companies or encourage the companies to do more, substantial, and also the more after the human rights due diligence. That's my hope.
And I can't have you on the podcast, Akiko, and not ask you, as this battle rages in Europe about the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD, how do Japanese companies, but especially bearing in mind the extraterritorial aspects of that directive, how are Japanese companies viewing what's happening in Europe over the CSDDD?
Yeah, thank you. So CSDD and also CSRD, and of course the recent omnibus, there have been paid a lot of attention from Japanese companies, I think. But it's interesting, but the companies who might be directly applied to by the CSDD or CSRD at some point are already doing kind of human rights due diligence for a couple of years, because they are big companies, and they are anyway they're requested by investors or their business partners. So they do not, of course, there are more CSRD or CSRD that require companies to disclose or report the certain aspect, which maybe the companies need to invest more. But they are they're following this international the development international momentum. So, but at the same time, there's some companies are also looking at what recently happened in the EU, said that should we do? So shall we wait for having the finalized the discussion, or shall we do something else? Then my answer is always the same. So please the start right now, because anyway this kind of the momentum, there will be a little bit maybe slowly, but still the people require the companies to do more, as I said, a substantial work, and also disclose more. So it's kind of a mix, not only the what happened in the EU, but also the what's happening in the US. So yeah, we hope that now it's a time that Japanese companies that play the more critical role, and also that proactively lead the practice in this the fora.
And that momentum, you've already talked in this podcast about living and working for periods in Thailand and in Cambodia. And that momentum is very much present in the Asian Pacific region, isn't it? And there's a bill for mandatory human rights due diligence for companies in the South Korean parliament. The government in Thailand is bringing forward mandatory human rights due diligence for companies. You work across Southeast Asia as well as in Japan. Just tell us a bit about what's going on there, which means that there's this very positive sweep within your region.
Thank you so much. So as you may remember, actually that Thailand was the first country in Asia which published the National Action Plan when it was 2019, 1 year before Japan. So then the background of this, the rapid policy development was the pressure from the EU on their human rights abuses the reported in the seafood industry. So then after receiving their suggestion, the recommendation by the Swedish government in the UPR, the process, Universal Periodical Review, which is the obligation for the UN, the member states to report, the human rights practice in the periodically. And then the Thailand has been kind of the leading one of the leading countries in particularly in Southeast Asia on this issue. And then now they're having the second NAP already a few years ago. The Thailand as you said, is now the keen to develop the mandatory human rights due diligence. So they're looking at the Thai NAP. It includes the very the important aspects which also includes environment and also human rights defenders. So I heard that the the Thailand, Thai companies that having also conducting human rights due diligence to be the competitive in the European market. But also at the same time, the many companies are SMEs, and also there's also the gaps there in terms of awareness and also knowledge that between the companies in Bangkok and the capital city of Thailand, and also other the cities. So I heard that the Ministry of Justice there has been leading this discussion, and they're really the keen to encourage the Thai companies, particularly SMEs, to be aware that how it is also like the beneficial to them. It is not like just a burden, or it's more like an investment, and also it's kind of like a way to be more competitive in a sustainable manner in the global market. And also, as you said, in addition to Thailand, now there are Indonesia and also the Malaysia looked very interested in the developing mandatory human rights due diligence, which was the mentioned in some international conference on business human rights. So I think that this is also interesting to see it, because the Thailand and Indonesia are also now they're trying to become OECD members, the state. So for that they need to show that their the standards is aligned with the OECD the standards, the guidelines. So I think that this kind of political willingness is really the kind of like a hope in the region, including what's recently that happened in South Korea. So then there kind of
just to say, the business and human rights movement will love the fact that these global examples are emerging, and that these are in countries that you wouldn't typically expect to be leaders. We're nearly at time, Akiko, but I said at the beginning, what lessons can the rest of the world learn from business and human rights in Japan? And so a simple question, just in a minute or so. If there's one lesson that the rest of the world can learn from Japan, what would that be?
Oh, that's a very nice but also hard question. But I could say the very simple and very old-fashioned, perhaps, but the one by one or the step by step. So the Japanese companies are mostly really like serious and very humble. So they try to be the perfect, which is there sometimes not good from human rights due diligence perspective. But what I learned from them is that they they learned on book, and they try to they involved the colleagues from different departments, and also try to get the commitment from the board. And it that took some time, but once they get the level, that they're actually like speed up their practice. So of course it I hope that more and more Japanese companies are doing more, but at the same time, I'm very encouraged by the learning from the practice, which is quite also insightful and also very the helpful to for me to gain the better understanding on what the human rights due diligence that should be on the practice base.
We've, I'm afraid, come to the end of our time, but in this podcast, we've heard that international influence, both in terms of legislation, but also practices within companies, has been a big push for business and human rights in Japan, but that allied with some very traditional cultural values and identities, including that concept that what is good for business is good for the company. We've heard that for companies themselves, they're very much following what peers are doing, and that peer pressure has been an important part in driving forward business and human rights, but also international trade. And as Japanese companies have increasingly invested and traded abroad, they've seen the respect for human rights being a very important part of the license to do so. We've heard how Japanese companies like guidance, and there's not, from Japan's METI, there's not just guidance about due diligence, there's guidance on the guidance. But that within that, there are very practical examples of Japanese companies themselves doing it, and a format to help them do it. And the Japanese government has been very pragmatic and practical in doing that. We've heard how due diligence isn't just for the large companies, but the medium-sized companies in Japan are addressing it. And we've heard on climate, although some internationally would criticise Japan for not going further and faster, that in fact Japanese companies are the leaders in terms of implementation of the Taskforce for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD. And we've seen, of course, on both social and environmental issues, moving quickly in terms of implementing the ISSB standards. On the European Union Omnibus and the CSDDD, Akiko has perhaps surprisingly said Japanese companies affected are doing it already. I don't think you use the word relax, but it's very much part of what you called a momentum, what's happening in Europe positively on CSDDD, you see, and Japanese companies see as a global momentum towards due diligence, business, and human rights. You talked about how these developments and that momentum isn't just confined to Japan, but it's very much shared across East and Southeast Asia. And I hope on Frankly Speaking, we'll come back and investigate that in more detail in the weeks to come. And he finished by saying that if there's one lesson all of us can learn from the Japanese experience, it's that traditional Japanese humility that we all know and actually celebrate, I think is a marvellous aspect of Japanese culture. But it leads business people to, with humility, just step by step, try to implement all of this. And maybe that's a very, very good lesson for us to learn indeed. Akiko Sato, thank you so much for being our guest on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've been listening to Frankly Speaking, the Frank Bold podcast on responsible business. Find out more about Frank Bold's Responsible Companies section on our website, and please give us your feedback on our LinkedIn page or by commenting via your podcast provider, where we hope you will also give this podcast a 5-star rating and share the conversation. Thank you again to Akiko and to all of you for listening. Do join us next time, and goodbye.